Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 46. Early in 2021, with the disgraced ex-president leaving the White House amid widespread controversy and accusations of inciting insurrection, it would have been possible to imagine a post-Trump era. There were many prominent Republicans signaling they were ready to move on. Reports of fracturing or breaking within the party surfaced due to the unprecedented situation of sedition and violence. A group of over 100 former Republican officials even threatened to form a third party if the Republican Party did not break with Trump and change course. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was building momentum as the successor. But this was short-lived. Ultimately, many did not follow through on distancing themselves from Trump, as he largely maintained voter support. Lindsey Graham reflects this phenomenon. Here he is on January 6th.
God, I hate it. From my point of view, he's been a consequential president. But today, first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. I've tried to be helpful.
And here he is later, as momentum swung back towards Donald Trump.
I would just say to my Republican colleagues, can we move forward without President Trump? The answer is no.
In today's episode, we're taking a sobering look into the enduring influence of Donald Trump on American politics and media. Despite how his presidency ended, the Trump phenomenon continues to shape our political landscape. How did we get here, and what does it mean for our future? To explore these pressing questions, we have a special guest whose expertise and recent work provide a profound lens through which to examine these issues. Joining us is Robert Gutsche, a cultural studies scholar and leader at Florida Atlantic's Political Communication and Public Opinion Research Lab. He is a seasoned journalist whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Guardian. Robert has extensively researched and written about political journalism and media coverage, including his notable book, The Future of the Presidency, Journalism and Democracy After Trump. His insights into the continuing impact of Trumpism on politics and media make him the perfect person to help us navigate this complex and ongoing narrative. Stay tuned as we discuss the themes of After Trump, the persistence of Trumpism, and what this means for our democracy and media landscape. You won't want to miss this insightful conversation with Robert Gutsche. Let's dive in. Dr. Gutsche, thanks for making time to come on our little show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, we talked a little bit before, and I wanted to say, and I sort of want to let the audience know that I was kind of going to frame this that, you know, the book has come out and it has this sort of after Trump title aspect to it. And of course, and it sounds like you were even kind of aware of this at the time, that basically after Trump is simply more Trump. And that's kind of where...
way. Yes, we have proven ourselves correct and still made the bad decision on the title. But I mean, in the last year, you know, I lived in England for a lot of the Trump years, and I'm not saying that there's a correlation there. I'm just saying I just happen to be an ocean away in some ways. And since coming back, we're in South Florida again, and driving up and back to Wisconsin twice already. You know, you really get to see a lot of America in different ways. And I'm just going to kind of sum up where we might be. All it takes, it seems, is a nice billboard with Donald Trump smiling and giving a thumbs up. And that seems to say it all for a lot of voters. Unfortunately, voters, you know, who are also independents are maybe looking at that and saying, well, am I getting that same sort of feeling of what it means to be American from Joe Biden? And I think, you know, a lot of the memes and a lot of the digital content that's going out is showing that maybe we're not getting a sense of a big smile and a thumbs up, and we all kind of know what that coded language means, right? And certainly for Trump, that coded language is very clear of I'll be back and we'll get it taken care of. And I think what's scary is that the emotions are so high, and I'm not one to dismiss emotions. If anybody knows me, certainly that's not what I'm saying. But the emotions are so high right now that really optics matter, maybe more than ever. And I think that, but the danger is that those optics are leading us to understanding how serious what that next term could be. I think we have some real concerns about naturalized citizenship and its status, and certainly issues of rights to marriage and the status of people. Are they going to be grandfathered in to certain things? So that picture of Donald Trump with thumbs up that I saw multiple times, and I always kick myself when I don't take those photographs because nobody believes me, right? Or I could have just shown it to you and said, look, those the emotions in those middle states and going back and forth, and you stop for gas and you have friends and you see, or you just kind of see things as people drive by. I mean, in South Florida, I see so many trucks down here with fake guns attached to the top of the truck or onto the side of the truck, and of course there's a "Don't tread on me" license plate, and a message to Biden that I'm not going to repeat based upon the language, but I think we kind of know what those bumper stickers say. That emotion is there, but I don't know that a real understanding of what the policies and politics behind those decisions really mean for people. I remember when Wisconsin was making a lot of changes and moving further to the right, specifically in its attacks on unions, a lot of people coming out and saying, "Oh my gosh, my EMS friend just lost their job," or my teacher friend is really losing their job. These people I know are really now going to have to sacrifice themselves in some ways, specifically financially, and their livelihoods are at risk. And it's kind of a question of, well, who did you vote for, right? Or what discussions are you having? But it all still seems to be wrapped up in kind of those optics of the imagination of what our lives could be, the simulacra, if you will, around kind of that imagination. So I don't know, is this what after Trump like you said, more Trump? But are we even? I mean, have we settled for the last 4 years our emotions and kind of that relief from the exhaustion that we all kind of went through? You can tell myself I'm kind of in a big emotional snowball of effects right now, trying to figure out where we're going and what we're doing. But somehow that optics of that billboard still sticks in my mind of how powerful just a smile and a thumbs up can mean to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And also I think that speaks a little bit to, I mean, a lot of this book is kind of self-reflective about journalism and some of that sort of speaks to this issue of sort of political journalism these days speaking to that segment.
Well, look, I always argue that the issue that led to Trump's rise was, and I won't go through the whole thing, but it was a grassroots, a trickle up effect, right? And what's happening is, and it happened with debates about Ten Commandments and city parks and prayer in school, and those were really local issues that never were easily resolved and moved up to county and state levels, to governorships, to Congress, and then to the presidency. This wasn't a movement that was a top-down sort of conservative movement. It was something that was real, happening at the local levels, that were being covered by local journalists, right? And I don't want to get onto the whole bandwagon of media deserts. These things are real. News deserts are real. Again, we know about them. But what we're missing now, particularly in this election, is looking at that coverage from a research perspective, from a practice perspective, looking at those local issues. What are people doing locally and what are they saying locally? Journalism is so focused on the national discourse, right? And it always has been. And journalism scholars have often gone because it's easier to get access to the New York Times and the Washington Post and Chicago Tribune, these agenda setting news outlets that they have been, that we've really ignored the local. And now, if we have an interest to go back to the local to try to understand if this is a trickle up effect of Trump, they're not there for us to go and get archive footage from the TV stations. They're still there, but that's never been easy to do. And certainly the print and digital outlets are gone. Or they're folded into something else, and it's an aggregate versus original content creation. And that's not a fault of the local journalists; it's a fault of our society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the book talks a bit about sort of reactions or evolution of journalism, sort of in response to Trump and Trumpism and just some of that kind of messaging, and so. And here we are in an election cycle, like I say. And for me, this is the first time with my show. I started my show in late 2022. So I've never been through this election cycle. I mean, even at the tail end of the midterms there. But, and I can see it in listeners, right? I can see this tension and this concern and these fears and really, and like you were saying in the beginning, just this angst kind of thing. Really boiling over or being expressed, and and we've seen changes in how people, specifically how a lot of journalism kind of deals with Trump, if you will, and sort of they're not covering his rally, every minute of his rallies and this kind of thing. So you see these changes. Do we think this is working, or and what else do they think they're going to do?
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, I'm helping lead a polling center here at Florida Atlantic that we just started at faupolling.com. And on one side of it, I mean, I'm a cultural studies scholar, so I kind of have my own issues with polling and self-fulfilling prophecy and kind of the damage and methodologically. But on the other hand, this constant curiosity about where we're going and what we're thinking. And I think political journalists are in that same sort of idea of, we know that there are some problems in these voices, right? But we also are under-resourced. We're also understaffed. We also are, responding to these day-to-day behaviors of politicians up and down the right and the left that really are becoming caricatures of themselves. And you almost look at it with an amazing fascination of how the persona of the politician plays itself into the news cycle, right? So Mitch McConnell, stepping down, it's not just about a change in terms of leadership or constituencies or policy changes or working across aisles or any of that sort of thing. It becomes, oh, well, let's dive into who these people are as personalities, right? And I feel like we move into that really quickly in these political cycles because the policy is really hard. I mean, and these are smart people who are doing the reporting, but policy is really complicated. Try and pull apart an omnibus bill, for instance, right? And that would take you weeks and weeks and weeks of coverage. You don't get those all the time, but just trying to explain a Supreme Court case and all of the details that go into that and the court process and appeals. And I think that's why we forget how many, suits Donald Trump's really a part of, right? And how many cases and which one's a criminal, which one's a civil. And even hearing those of us who are educated formally in these types of ways, forgetting about, the difference between a civil trial and a criminal trial, and forgetting that even though a jury comes down and says $335 million or something, right? Like that person's probably never going to pay that out, or that there's this other, then it gets into how much real estate a person owns and if they really are going to go bankrupt. And then it becomes, what the hell are we talking about anymore? Like what was the actual civil case about? When did that civil case happen? Or I don't know how to organize and compartmentalize our brains to look at all of these different layers, which is, I think, why the emotion comes back again. So imagine being a political reporter having to deal with all of those different things, just being a subject expert on that case itself, and then remembering or realizing, oh, the audience is really clicking on this other stuff. How does that feel? Not just, is that good for democracy, but how does that feel? And I think there's been a big increase in journalistic happiness research, people who are looking at burnout, people who are looking at harassment in the workplace. And I think we should be paying attention to the jobs of the journalists as well, that they may be wanting to try and tell some of these deeper stories, which are super complicated. They're getting hit on the head by audiences that say, I don't want that. Even my students this week were saying, but don't you think we should be covering X, Y, and Z? And I said, well, I don't know what I think. Like, let's have a conversation. And the result is that what audiences really want, even if journalists think that they should?
Right. You're right. There's always that trade-off of, people that the information that's important versus is anybody going to listen to it, right?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't do you any good to say the first, if there's nobody listening,
right?
And this is, and that brings actually sort of takes me to, and you may be aware of this research or other research, but Magdalena Wojciechak, I think is how you say it, and her research is sort of showing that our problem kind of isn't fake news; it's that there's no news consumption at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost no news consumption, and she sort of says that it's only like 3% of people's consumption, and that and that makes us more susceptible to these populist messages and things like that. And our focus should maybe be less on sort of fake news and that kind of thing, and more somehow on news diet. But I mean, that's like, how do you change somebody's fundamental behavior?
Well, and that goes to the polling questions that we ask about news consumption. And one of the questions might be, where do you get your news? And the answer, I mean, maybe it's a really bad instrument. I haven't seen an excellent instrument that measures what I'm going to tell you. But, a question around where do you get your news? And one of the options is social media. Well, but social media doesn't create its own content, right? I mean, unless it's a statement that they're releasing, or there's an ad that they've put for themselves, or they're saying a change to terms and conditions, or Elon Musk maybe makes his own stuff from X. I mean, I don't know, but it's not a news provider. And so then the question becomes where it becomes fake, where fake news or deep fakes is. People don't even know what they're screening, what they're screening when they go across. Like, if you're making a determination, you're saying, I'm going to believe this or not, or I'm going to read this or not, or I'm going to watch this or not. That's a screening effect, right? But we don't even know what characteristics or judgments to make. And so we say we get I get news from social media. Well, this is almost now, it's funny, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to say this is an age-old question now, right? When people say, I get my news from social media, and you try and figure out, well, what source? Like, how do you know that? I'm working on a project with a colleague, Aaron Veenstra here, where we're going to try to walk through with people their social media use. And I know other people have done this. They've done this for a very long time at this point, and we still just can't seem to get the answer. But the idea of social media, whether it's a good or bad influence, that's a different conversation. We just don't even know what it is that we're looking at half of the time. Now, I look at it and I can look and say, oh, this is an NPR thing that's coming across, but that's because this is my livelihood, right? It's not a different behavior, right? I remember when I was a reporter, of course I read who the byline was, right? Of course I knew what the byline, who wrote the piece, but nobody paid attention to no real person dealt with bylines. They all thought that we wrote our own headlines too, right? I remember as a reporter, I'd get so many snotty or congratulatory emails or messages or phone calls or whatever it was about an article based upon the headline that I didn't even bloody write.
Right.
Right. So it's not saying that the public is full of sheep. I'm saying that we've done a very good job of either shooting ourselves in the foot by not doing better branding, or better sponsorship of our content, or better ownership of our content, or we've just in media handed over. And Christy Hessen, I think, kind of made some of this argument in a paper a while ago that we gave up on the social components of what journalism is, and we handed that role to play over to social media platforms. In other words, local sports is a social event. City council is a social event. A party at a park is a social event. And we really, when social media came out, we said, well, let us hop onto your platform, right? And we've become diluted, I think, into this, right? We've been diffused into it as well. And there's no real sense of who we are or what we are. But our journalism students still seem to have a sense of who we are and what we are. And then they get kind of, professionalized out of that again and into that same idea of, oh, wait, only 500 people read my article. I don't know. Hell, that's
Hmm.
great. 500 people read your article, but really when your audience, the other person's article got 5,000 hits, you kind of become demoralized, I think.
Yeah, or somebody's TikTok with a 30-second clip of it got 2 million hits or something.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And of course I'm using low numbers because I've been at local newspapers
Right.
recently looking at their hits. So my hits are a little my understandings of those numbers are coming from, the from more of regional and local papers where those are really high numbers,
Right.
5,000 people and, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like that's a question happening, and I mean, I can imagine sitting around, some of these rooms and where you're sort of thinking about this strategy, and there's the whole thing about everybody's got an agenda and they just want to, it's all fake news, forgetting all that, like a bunch of reasonable folks that have really well-intentioned motivation and really appreciate the ethics of it and all that, having a bunch of really hard conversations, right? This is like, what is the right way even mean? Like, what is, like, if we're going to say is how we're handling Trump working, how do we even define what working is?
I think that's a really great question. And again, when we get sidetracked by the what we feel to be the obvious answers to cover it, right? Cover this, cover that, cover this. And I hear what you're saying also that there were decisions made, that we would cut into Donald Trump's rhetoric at some point, right? And we would make some decisions to not follow through. I mean, even Fox News, pushing back a lot of things about what is or isn't true, asking for evidence, and when you start seeing Fox News push back against that, that is a statement about some larger issues that are going on. But even with that baseline is missing.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, how? So, I've always sort of talked to folks about sort of structural changes. I mean, we talk a lot about what an individual can do, but this would be sort of a bigger structural thing. I mean, it seems like we're so caught up in the way things are financed these days that those kind of things seem challenging in the sort of structure that we have now.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think there could be like legislation that could help fund some of that to promote it or encourage it?
Well, I was really excited years ago. I dived into some of the nonprofit news sector stuff, and that seems to still be a place where we're seeing growth. I mean, Knight Foundation and others are continuing to grow their nonprofit status. I don't know about legislation. I mean, certainly there are scholars who that is their area through critical political economy and other things. I don't know that I see that coming down the pipeline. I think it's a nice conversation, and I think we certainly have issues of regulation that are on the table when you're talking about social media platforms. These are private companies that seem to be operating the public sphere in ways that we never intended or expected them to be operating. Therefore, does regulation have to be a part of it? And I think I bring up regulation because often funding is associated with regulation, right? And I think there's a lot of concern. But I've also worked with public radio and public television and never really saw from my vantage point any sort of meaningful intervention, right, in changing the content. I just wish, and this may sound silly, but I just wish two programs were a little bit more successful and seen by Americans, or things that we could turn to. The CBS Sunday morning show, and I know that maybe is a really strange thing to bring up, but I don't know even the last time anybody's watched it, but it's amazing, right? I mean, there's stories from across the country. It's about art and culture, and that is not publicly funded, right? That's an obvious decision to continue to invest in something that may have a certain demographic, right? That may have a certain time slot, that has a lot of freedom to do different types of visuals and audio work. But that's one that I think they've continued to contribute to, and I'd like to see that sort of commitment be expanded. It's a commitment of the corporation to tell those types of stories. The second is 60 Minutes. I mean, these are I don't know why I'm picking on CBS, but these are great things that show a continued effort and contribution to a type of journalism and storytelling that I mean, there may not be a huge audience for it, especially today. but it still gets picked apart and put onto Instagram. I mean, there's still ways that we can take these things and convert them into more spreadable media. But I just think that it's not because I think there's something wholesome or even nostalgic about it, but I think that there is a sense of how story is told differently, about different people, about different issues, and the chances of trying to get more diverse topics and diverse voices out there. Um, those are two examples of things I wish that we would do more of instead of, I turn on MSNBC and there's like flashing lights all over the place and music and scores and all this sort of stuff and text running across all the place. And it's almost like I'm watching a sports app, where my mind is completely distracted half the time, when the coverage that is being told is a horse race before the race even begins.
Hmm.
Right? Jack Lutely wrote about, and Lakoff and Johnson and others I think have written about, metaphor. Metaphor has really taken over a lot of our political conversation about who's winning and who's losing, what's up and what's down, when the clock is going to strike 12. I mean, all these different these ways of talking about politics. I really just miss the stories about average people. Maybe I'm getting old.
Yeah. Well, I mean, since the book is kind of about political,
Yeah.
journalism a lot, and we're kind of getting into this, we're in this election season now. Um, and there is talk about the sort of politics of fear and phobias and all that, and that is only ramped up. I mean, it's not like Trump invented that; that's been going on long before Trump. But certainly, he was sort of an accelerant of that, and that's going on both sides. I mean, you people on the right, of course, are going to scare you about how Biden is going to be. The institutions are the problem, and this kind of thing, and the left is going to tell you how Trump's going to overthrow democracy, and so you couldn't be more frightened right now about all this stuff, and so I guess they're not. I mean, that's just going to continue to happen because that's how they get those clicks and likes and shares and get the attention. But I guess as we're a couple of things. I guess one is, do you see it much changing between now and during this election season that can help? A, and then B, like as a consumer, what are some of the main things we can do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be so pessimistic. I just feel like we're moving at a million miles an hour down a long tunnel, and I'm starting to see a train or something that might be a train, right? And I don't know when it's going to hit me, and I don't know if there's like I can change the tracks. I mean, talk about metaphors, right? I mean, we're all just living in weird, this weird world. I don't see anything changing with it. I think it's fascinating that Donald Trump hasn't really had to participate in much of the performance of running for president. I mean, I just think it's amazing that this is still, it's got more steam, but that's part of that draining the swamp. I'm not going to participate in these things that are already rigged against me. This type of rhetoric, that where I think, again, local journalism and other types of storytelling would help us understand why those ideologies are living so strongly today. So I see this going the same route. I see him, kicking against the structure and the infrastructures that are placed out in front of him, and just kind of run a rebel with a cause sort of idea. And his cause is quite clear. As a consumer, man, news avoidance is a double-edged sword, right? I mean, news avoidance is the way that some of us can sleep at night, right? And take a deep breath is just don't look at it. But the other side of it is then you're even more removed from the system, right? I mean, I remember social action. I had a new kid. We had just done this first book. Donald Trump was elected. I bought myself a T-shirt for charity to save our national parks. I remember that. And then I went and got a library card where I was living, right? Because at the same time we were trying to go after libraries. I think while those are small aspects, we need to start moving away from becoming aware of the issues and moving into taking action on the issues, right? we have to try to avoid that idea of news avoidance, right? We have to try and say, okay, what are the things that I think I'm interested in? Maybe I need to give myself, you mentioned a news diet. Maybe I need to give myself a news diet, right? Which means I'm going to take in some of this information. But we have to start to think about, why are we consuming this news? What are we going to do with it? We have to start moving away from the idea of awareness is helpful. Awareness doesn't do much. Action does a lot. And taking, maybe that's going to a protest, maybe that's sending a letter, maybe that's making a phone call. These all sound like maybe trite things in a world where that train is barreling down on us, right? But I'd sure like to see a lot more action from us as individuals.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I think you'll agree with this, but tell me if not, that I would say in taking that action, which I think is great, it's always nice to have agency and do things, but let's make it something beyond clicking the like button and beyond retweeting.
Yes, please. I absolutely agree with you, and I call that. So when we talk about collectivism, right, and we talk about that people think that that's activism. I absolutely agree with you, and I'm throwing that into awareness. I'm saying that's nothing more than you've now said you've become aware of something. You've shown me that you might be aware of something, and now you're trying to make somebody else aware of something. That's not action in that example. So I think, when was the last time I was at a soup kitchen? I can't tell you, right? I got 2 kids who I'm trying to help become, aware and find avenues for action themselves. And maybe that's all I can do right now. But I think now is the time that we need to really understand that that is important. If all that you can do, if that's all you can do, it's still a lot more than a lot of other people, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we need to reward ourselves by saying, okay, I tried to do something this week. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. But the world's a hard place right now. It probably always has. I mean, I think it's interesting, as I get older, I start to wonder, were my parents dealing with the same sort of uncertainties, or is it really different today? I think with amplification, it's different. I think, certainly it is different, but how did they survive this? How did they survive? I don't know. Maybe it's an oral history project.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for making time to come on the show. I really enjoyed it, and I think the listeners are going to appreciate it.
Thanks for doing it. It's a great program. Thanks.
Thank you. And that is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If you enjoyed this episode, if you found it interesting, please tell some friends about it. Post it to your social media. Better yet, text someone. Even better, talk to someone in real life. Tell them about this show. I really appreciate it. Okay, see you in a week or two.